Hey everybody, or rather I am Professor Lillie, and I just want to welcome you to Emerging Media Law and Regulation and just talk, hopefully 10 minutes or less, about the structure of the course and also to introduce myself. And I used to prefer to do like a lot of lecture material in a course like this, and I decided that this semester I'm going to really try to let the reading and the resources kind of do the talking and allow you to engage with them. So this will probably I wanted to do at least one video where you could see my face and I could introduce myself, and then I'll probably do one more at the end of the semester talking about the final project. Um, a little bit about me, and I'm wearing my University of North Carolina. I'm not sure if you could see where it says journalism, School of Journalism and Mass Communication, and now it's called School of Media and Journalism, and at University of North Carolina, and that's where I got my PhD. And that's where I started to get into media law in general. I took two courses there as part of my PhD, and I took them from this professor who just recently retired, Kathy Packard, who really focused a lot on First Amendment law, and she, in fact, wrote the handbook on media law for North Carolina journalists. It's like a little handbook, little book that people can carry around with them, and it's still in press today. Um, and she was also my advisor for the first year before I decided to focus more on digital media culture in my PhD. And at that time, we did a lot of the course is kind of focused on really knowing the laws. It's because my program was a little bit more geared towards journalism. A lot of it had to do with journalistic applied laws in the First Amendment. So here's just an example of some of the laws we would have learned about. Um, and in this class, in emerging media law, however, what we want to do is focus more on some of the contemporary issues and not necessarily get really deep into a lot of the really early laws, like how these different areas of media law are touched on in the Constitution or not. And really focused on how a person who's getting into different emerging media industries can think kind of more dynamically about different laws that might impact their industry. So it's really more kind of practical approach that we want to have in this class, as opposed to expecting you to become kind of like mini media law experts. So, for example, I just was looking at, and there's lots of different areas of law cases, whether it's First Amendment and the Constitution or jurisprudence cases since then, that affect different industries. So I just happened to come upon a blog for artists and designers, and it was just talking about some of the top copyright cases that you might want to know if you were a graphic artist or in that industry. And this is one of the famous ones having to do with the Barack Obama poster, which was found to be, or they settled out of court, but went to court because it seemed to be a ripoff of this copyrighted photo of Obama. So we really want to keep it practical to different industries and allow you to also have some freedom into looking at cases in areas that you are most interested in. So getting back to the Moodle course. So as you know, like all your other emerging media Emma courses, this is all online. Some practical things for me. I'm big into email, so anytime you have any kind of question or confusing, always just email me. I have two teenagers, so as you can see right now, I'm at home. I'm surprised you can't see or hear the dog barking. It's a very nice day. I'm enjoying the kind of relatively mild winter we're having so far. So I do a lot of my work either on campus or at home during the day when my kids are at school. And so then I become more busy in the afternoon until they're getting into bed, which tends to also be the time when I'm getting into bed. So I'm just throwing that out there because usually if you sent me an email like later in the day, it might take me a while to get back to it. And if for some reason I don't respond within a day, then please definitely send it again and say, hey, I think maybe you didn't get this. And it might possibly be true. Sometimes, perhaps like some of you, I might have a slow email day, or I might have a really heavy one, and all of a sudden something might be buried beneath 20 or 30 emails. You can also call me on my personal phone, but if you do, I recommend that you text me first and say that you're going to call, so that when I see the number, I don't think that you're a spammer or something like that. So I know it's coming from a student. So this course was originally designed by Elliot King, and it still is kind of reading heavy. I think when I inherited it every year, I've been trying to kind of whittle down and really try to get to what's seems to be practical information for students, considering we don't necessarily know which area, which field in emergent media you might go into. So I've been kind of trying to whittle down every year, and also make the Moodle course design be really straightforward. But one thing that Dr. King did come up with, and we still have here, is the course's big question that really centers everything we're going to do in the course. And so we're going to have 4 different modules in the course, and then a couple weeks at the end for you to do a final project of your choice. And for each one of these areas, each one of these topics for the modules, we're going to ask the question, what are the most important legal issues, restrictions, and questions communication professionals must consider in creating content and advising clients? And this has also become the kind of big question for me every year, as I'm kind of like trying to really hone down what this course focuses on, and helping me to guide, like, what do students kind of really need to know and can help them. What are some of the foundations that can help them to guide them to learn more, if they want to go deeper into certain areas, as opposed to necessarily getting really deep into history, or having to read really, really long legal cases, which is something I had to do, but sometimes at the end I'd be like, well, did I really need to read that whole thing, as opposed to a synopsis, and understand what the implications of that law or that case are. So again, each of the 4 modules, we're going to be coming back to this big question, and then also for you at the end in your final project. And I think it's easier to kind of see our outlook here for the semester by just looking at the schedule. Now note, like, some of these dates at the end, I haven't gone back, and some of them are just have just changed by like 1 day. Like it might end up being April 6th is really that Thursday. But you can see here, topic 1 that we're in right now is copyright. Then we get into privacy, then issues of regulation, and finally section 203 of that really goes into like the core of social media, and how it can be or cannot be regulated by the government, and also how those social media companies can and cannot be sued by individuals. So section 203 and free speech, and then we have the final project. So each one of these 4 sections or modules is 3 weeks, except the first one, which we're in copyright, because this first week we're kind of having an extra week for introductions and kind of just getting into the course and watching this this orientation video and things like that. So that's the only reason the copyright is 4, but all of them are 3 weeks, and then we have the final project. So with that in mind, let me actually fast forward to the privacy week, which is the first one that's like the traditional. I'll come back to copyright, which we're in right now, just because privacy is 3 weeks, just like regulation and free speech is. So, and all of the modules are structured in this way. So, in the first week of that module, you have all of the readings and videos and resources. So, and again, I've really tried to hone down on what these are and not overburden you with cases and things like that, which was something I did have students do in previous years. And but still, if you find this to be a lot of reading for 1 week, remember that this module really is 3 weeks long, and so we're expecting you to get into the reading and like for example, and then also usually there's at least one video, so you can see the TED Talk here on data privacy and consent. But in weeks 2 and 3 of the module, you're going to be coming back to this reading. So if you're coming back and there's one particular thing you want to talk about and you didn't read the whole Bloomberg Law article on privacy and children's use of social media the first week, then you can always come back to it. So you're expected to kind of constantly engage within this 3-week module with this reading, which is always in the first week or located in the first week on Moodle. And then in the first week of each module, well, and since I'm gonna skip back here in a second to copyright, since I want to talk a little bit more about and kind of introduce this first copyright as the first module. But for each one, at the end of that first week, you're going to have a chance to look for additional resources, like if there's certain cases or certain things about that you heard about in the reading and want to go into more details. We're asking you to identify a couple new resources associated with this area in that first week and kind of synthesize some of the things that you learned in your reading. And then in the second 2 weeks of the module, you really only have one thing to do for each one of those weeks. And the first one is to synthesize some of the things you learned. So pick out several themes and talk about it and get peer reviewed for that synthesis. And then in the second week, at the very end of or rather the third week, at the very end of the module, you will do any revisions to that synthesis that you want based on the peer review, and then also apply those themes that you're talking about, that you learned about, your key takeaways, to a business case of your choice or a kind of mock scenario. So a specific case that you've read about, or a kind of mock scenario that you're kind of thinking about that might apply in a industry that you might be interested in going into. So I'm going to skip back to copyright though and give you some specific examples of that. I just wanted to use privacy because it's the typical 3-week design of all the modules except for this first one. And again, the first one for copyright is just so that we have an extra week for the beginning of the semester. So so this week, you do have a little bit of extra time again. So you know, I would start getting into some of these readings in the first video that's just on the basics of copyright law. We have on the Refinery 29 article on Instagram, one on LA Times on the TikTok strike, an article on copyright NFTs, and so again, you're probably going to come back to this in week 2 and 3. Again, partially because this first module on copyright is 4 weeks. So, and then don't forget by the end of this week to introduce yourself on Flipgrid. I find it's easiest if you're already logged in to your Loyola email account, because we use Microsoft for our email system at Loyola. So if you're already logged in, it's easier just to click on this and then you say log in through your school Microsoft account. So choose Microsoft when you log in. And just give us an overview, like an introduction to yourself and some basic ideas of things that you're kind of interested in maybe learning about in this course. Okay, so that's first week. We have the reading materials. And there's one additional thing that's a little bit different. And what we want you to do is to come in and think about that big question after, and you really honestly can do this before getting into the reading. This is kind of just a some preliminary thoughts on the on the big question, which is again is what do you think are the most important legal issues and restrictions in communication for communication professionals that they must consider in creating content and advising clients. So again, the same big question, but we're asking you to do this, as if you're coming into it before the course. And so part of our process is reflecting back at the end and what did you learn? How would you answer this question at the end of the course differently? Okay, so that's due this Sunday. And another thing this is bringing me into, and this might be similar to some of your other Emma courses, may be different, but generally the way I think about this course is every week begins on a Monday and it ends on a Sunday. Now, granted, this is not a course where you're expected to necessarily do work on any one day of the week. So I say, okay, the week starts on Monday. Well, maybe you don't get into the coursework until Tuesday or Wednesday on your own time. That's fine. You just have to keep in mind the due dates, which tend to be on Wednesday. I'm sorry, on Sunday evening by right before midnight EST standard time. So again, the reason why we have an extra week is so that you can get some of your initial thoughts and your introduction on Flipgrid, and then we kind of jump into the normal schedule where the second week we're going to come into your opportunity to look into some additional resources, doing some extra research of your own. Okay, so I'm asking you to do some of that research, go online, maybe find out about some more recent cases in one of the areas that you're most interested in. Maybe you're an artist and you go and you research some of these areas associated that some of the cases that really impact digital artists the most, and you find a couple. Maybe you even use this one here, this blog about. That talks about, I think, the top 5 cases that that artists need in the digital age need to know. And so if you chose that web page as a resource, then you would give it a summary. You would include the URL, and then lastly, since this is a forum that we're asking you to use, I also want you to go through and respond to at least one other student's post. So after they posted, like read through and see what some other students have talked about, find one of the posts that you think are most interesting and respond to them. And just talk a little bit about like what you learned from their resource, and then maybe explain a little bit more about how concept relates to ideas that were presented in the resource. So again, this is just I've kind of dialed back a little bit on the peer-to-peer interaction I used to have a lot, like every single week, and I think it just it can kind of be a little bit overburdening, considering the fact that most of you are working full time and to have to come back to the site a whole lot and engage with every single one of your peers. So most of these peer responses, I'm just asking for you to engage one person and kind of think about what they wrote about and give them a little bit of feedback. Okay, so that would be so in all the modules, pretty much with the exception of this first one, we're talking about giving you an opportunity to reflect on the course's essential questions. The first thing after getting into the reading we ask you to do is looking into additional resources and responding to one peer. And then we get into the second 2 weeks of each module. So for copyright, this will be, the first aspect will be due February 5th, and then the second at the end of module on the 12th. So the first thing we ask you to do is to think about what are some of the lessons you learned in the reading. And to do that, we give you, for each module, we give you a template. So here's the template for copyright. So in this template, you'll find is pretty much exactly the same for each module. So and it is, as you can see, somewhat self-directed. So as you're going through the reading, what I would recommend you do is to have this Word document open, and when you kind of find something that's really interesting, then just go ahead and jot it down as one of your 3 key ideas, themes. It could even be if there's a case or a particular law rather than idea, theme, or concept within this whole topic. So this first one being copyright. And then talk about what you think or how this concept is important to understanding legal issues, restrictions, questions that communication professionals must consider in creating content and advising clients. So you see this, the big question here is sneaking up into every single module, but we're asking you to just choose a couple or 3 areas and then think specifically how does it apply in the industry. And just to give you an example, so I just pulled out one from last semester. And so the student is finding, first of all, talking about the issues having to do with social media content designation as public for a poster. And then finally talking about some specific copyright law that give exclusive rights to creators. And then finally, the concept of thinking about how what businesses must consider as work for hire. And so this would be what the student would submit this first week here. And they would be peer reviewed by just one person. So this is another where we're asking you to come up with the 3 big ideas, how they apply in the industry, and then after you do that, look at what some of your other peers, other students in the class have written about, and just reply to one person to give them a little bit of feedback. And then the second week, we asked you to kind of hone what you've done. So take what you wrote here. If you got whatever feedback you got from your peers to make it a little bit stronger in the template, anything you noticed to kind of really hone down and make it a little bit stronger. So just doing a little bit revision in that last week of the module. But then we're asking you to identify a particular legal issue that came up for a business that has implications for these policy areas. And it's described here as well. So you're using the same template, you're revising what you've done, but then you're coming up with a real business scenario, so an actual law case or a mock situation, so a situation that you think that could occur. And in this student's case, in terms of the application of some of these themes, now some of these themes here might not apply as much, okay? So you don't necessarily have to know what your business case is going to be when you're doing this work in week 2 of the module. But then you're talking about how it applies, or some of these issues apply in a specific case. In this case, student looked at Instagram, Facebook and Instagram terms and conditions associated with giving permission for music libraries for individuals, but not necessarily for any corporate or commercial uses, and just applying that business case, and then specifically laying down some specific areas that might apply. So, and then again, let's go back. We're using the same template for this one. So each one of the modules is going to go through the same process. And I will give, because I thought, when I came back to look at what the student did. It was useful to seeing some practical application. So I'm going to come through and give an example of what a student chose to do for in each one of the modules, just to see what for the final version, because in this final version for week 3, you can see how they chose 3 different policies or issues to talk about, and then you can also see how they applied a specific business case. And so I think it's just useful to have an example of looking and see what a student, how they have already filled out the template. So that's where we're at for each one of the modules. We go through this process. I do a lot of my interaction with you as students through grading. So just let me show you, and I have a grading rubric here. I'm going to click into grades here, which I normally wouldn't do, obviously, if I was recording, because there's no, at this point, there's no grades. There's your names here. But so some of these are participation. So I'm going to go through and just see that you answered that question, the question for the first week, which is asking you to reflect on the big question of the course without actually having to go through the course. And others, I have a rubric where I'm going to give you more specific feedback, like on how you filled out the template and additional ideas that I might have. So a lot of my interaction with you is going to be through each week, and you can see all of the items here are represented in the gradebook, and just giving you some basic feedback and filling out with the course system, or rather the point system. I have a relatively easy rubric here that's, again, mostly focused on participation, but also just, synthesis. I can tell when you've done the reading and when you're really trying to apply those questions and come up with some of the main lessons learned. And granted, for each one of these areas, I mean, each one of these 4 areas could have its own course, right? Especially if we had something that's whether it's in law school or whether it would be in a PhD or something like that in media and mass communication. So we're not expecting you to get in deep into each one of these areas, but kind of have a sampling enough for you to say, well, here are what are 3 kind of bigger areas or bigger cases that I felt I identified going through the reading and the viewings for this module. So that's all I'm going to talk. I think I went over my 10-minute and I knew I would, because I tend to go on and on and on. So I just wanted to give a basic overview. Again, anytime you want to contact me, just email me, and I'll generally send out an email at the beginning of every week just reminding you what's going on for that week. I hope you have a great semester and you learn a lot. And again, I'll go more in depth. I'll send a video towards the end of the semester talking about the final project, which has lots of different options, as you can read about on your own time if you want to. But I'll have another video about that later in the semester. So take care. Enjoy the unseasonably warm winter we're having here in Maryland, if you're actually living here, and enjoy the course.